Welcome to the Motogp Xtra podcast.
Round 7 of the Motogp circus has brought us to the Tuscan Hills of Mugello for one of the standout rounds of the season. Mugello is always kind of, for us, the jewel of the calendar, and it's well known as one of the most important races of the Motogp season. Rhys, after the weekend is done, did you enjoy it? We didn't get the weather that we thought we might coming into this race weekend. We thought maybe Friday, Saturday, or even if they changed last minute, it could be Saturday, Sunday. We might see a bit of weather, but we did escape it. What did you make of the whole Mugello weekend?
Certainly some mixed feelings. Obviously, some parts of the weekend were really positive, some parts not so much, as well. I'm sure we'll come on to, especially with some sort of horrifying flashbacks, really, in the Moto3 race, especially. The racing wasn't amazing across the three classes, I don't think. I mean, Moto2 was pretty decent, but I think it was fairly calm. But I think that may be a bit of a nature, especially in the MotoGP class, of the speeds that they're going at on these main straights now just make it so difficult, and the aero, because obviously Mugello classically one of the best places to pass is into turn one, and that seems to be an incredibly difficult move to pull off these days. So yeah, a bit of a mixed weekend, but you know, it's always good to see the atmosphere at Mugello. I mean, after the race, all the fans and with Bagnaia and just across the whole weekend. I mean, it sounds like it's a bit of a pain if you're trying to sleep when you're actually there, because apparently from about 7 o'clock in the morning there's chainsaws going off. But it's I'm sure it's still a nice atmosphere anyway.
Yeah, overall Mugello is one of the kind of, again, like I said, it's kind of the jewel Monaco for everyone. We have Mugello. That's kind of the, like, it's kind of always said that.
Aston,
Aston as well as equally as historic. But with Mugello, I think you wouldn't get that racetrack today. That's a track that was built in a different time, where like it's built in these beautiful hills. You just wouldn't get that today. You think of all the Tilcodrome tracks have been built over the last, we'll say, 10 years, 15 years. They're a bit on the dull side. They're nothing compares to the hills of Mugello, and you just see some of the shots where it just pans across the valleys, and it's a sight to see. But we're going to get into the race weekend now, because we do have a fair bit to cover. Moto3, as always, a man's name who's going to get mentioned, Alonso. Yeah, so we're going to start with the first main race. Alonso breaks the group early, has a big moment into kind of on the entry, you could say, just comes off the edge of the curb and loses the rear. The commentary team on TNT didn't make that big of a deal of it. I nearly fell off my bed when I saw it live. As he kind of just drifts out of Arrabbiata 1, just drops off the edge of the curb, and the rear snaps, and into Arrabbiata 2 he managed to kind of recover. But before the red flag that we'll get to in a second, Alonso had made a break, and to be honest, that actually nearly benefited him after the red flag. But what did you make of Alonso? Did you expect him to go early? Because I was actually personally surprised that he went that early.
No, I thought he was going to go from the start. It was one of those weekends where he just had so much pace in hand of everybody all weekend. And I know obviously he did a similar thing in Jerez and obviously crashed, but this time at Mugello, like, part of the Moto3 race becomes a bit of luck at Mugello because of the long straight and the slipstream, and you can keep in some sort of slower riders, whereas obviously at some of the more technical, well, I mean, Mugello's very technical, but tracks without the slipstream so much, you can kind of maybe eke away from the slower riders a little bit. And I think in the past people have been caught out by that. I mean, I think Dennis Onchu tried to do the same thing last year. He had a bit of pace in hand over everybody all weekend and tried to end up pulling away. He couldn't do it, and he actually got dragged to the line, didn't he, in the end? So it kind of shows that's the thing. So yeah, I thought that he'd actually want to do that because he'd got so much pace in hand. I mean, I remember in qualifying, he'd almost practiced it in qualifying. He'd allowed Ortola to stick on the back of him throughout the whole of quali. Ortola done a good couple of laps and was sort of, I think Ortola was actually on pole, and then he just dropped the hammer and just dropped him completely, and did a lap time way quicker than anybody else. So yeah, I mean, he was like a second quicker than like the end of the top 10 or I think even the top 5 in some of the sessions. It was crazy. So yeah, I thought he was going to try and check out, because that's what I would probably do as well if I was in that position and had that pace advantage. I'd want to go, because the slipstream at Mugello is so sort of dependent. So yeah, actually in contrast, I even though I know he tried to do it at Jerez and it bit him, I think he learned from that mistake. I don't think he quite went as hard, but he definitely went and tried to stretch out the pack, and well, obviously it ended up working for him.
Yeah, and it was a surprise to me he went that early, but I suppose then you did make a good point that the whole, just the Moto3 Mugello look of, sure, wasn't it, was it 2017 when Mino won from like 16th on like 2 laps ago? He was out of the points and he won. I can't remember the year, but Mino won from way back in the group. Something
like
around that
like
time.
25, wasn't there, at the front?
Yeah, exactly. The whole start straight was just a slipstream fest. It was crazy. The class has kind of evolved a bit since then, thankfully, because As we come on to our next point, it's not always the best thing having a group that big, but I was just surprised him to go that early. Again, he made that small mistake on the kind of exit of Arbiata 1. He was very lucky to get away with that one. But again, it just looked like he was in control. After end of the 3 laps, we end up getting a red flag. It was a horrible incident, really. Shades of De Pasquier 3 years ago at the exact same corner, very similar crash. Immediately, soon as they showed the replay, I was tense, and it's kind of a weird one, and it's probably something we probably should brush up really with the overall is just how they deal with bigger accidents. Immediately, nearly a rider's okay come up on screen, which we've known in years gone by that's actually not always true. It's when there's a big crash, it just seems that the I suppose the live feed especially doesn't handle it well. They're more concerned about the show, what goes on, and it just feels like you're, as the viewer especially, you're sitting there like, ooh, a bit tense, but they're trying to be like, oh, it's all okay, he's fine, he'll be okay, let's move on, back to the front. And again, fair play, the red flagged it fairly quickly again. He was so the 2 riders were Shabby, what's the second name? Zarathustra, and for the Farioli, so the home rider, unfortunately came together. So it was just tense when it happened, because it was the same place that we lost to Pasquier, obviously, and it was, again, like I said, it was such a similar crash. Rhys, were you surprised how fast the red flag came out? Because I was, to be honest, because if we have gone by history, red flags don't really come out that often in Moto3, regardless of the instance. So I was really surprised. I'm quite happy to see the red flag pretty soon after.
I actually disagree. I thought they took way too long to put the red flag out. Because
really,
yeah, I mean, someone's literally been ran over, is lying in the track, and then they're almost round to that corner again before the red flag comes out. Should never be able to almost get back round. I mean, what were they going into, like Savelli when the red flag came out, Casanova, something like that? Maybe I'm
they were in the
misremembering
first sector, I think. Or well, again,
yeah.
no. We're probably, it's been say 6 hours since we've seen it, so we're probably both maybe remembering it slightly different. But from what you think, if they're going into Savelli, I thought they were coming out of turn 4, so they're probably in the first, second sectors.
Yeah. But let's put it this way: we saw a replay of him getting ran over before the race got stopped. So
yeah, that's the kind of point I was making. That's wrong, because like, as soon as you see a rider get run over, get hit at speed, you know that there's a serious injury. So, yeah, that's just not good to see at all.
Yeah, because usually you get a replay pretty quick. Like yesterday in the sprint race when Oliveira took out Quartararo, we got a replay pretty quick after that happened. Both riders were fine. That's okay, because you're like, oh, these guys have gone down. This is what's happened. But if you're not sure whether the rider's okay, and obviously the TV direction have access to all that footage, and also will probably be being radioed to say this guy's down and we need to bring out a red flag or whatever. They've then shown the crash before the red flags even came out, so we don't even. I mean, that doesn't even make it any better. Even if it's probably actually worse if you do it after the red flag came out, because obviously it's a serious accident. But it's like, kind of maybe wait till we know what the guy's condition's like before you want to show it again, because they did the same thing with Dupasquier. They showed the replay of him crashing and being killed. They showed it on live feed, and then it went all around social media. And I'm pretty sure his little brother didn't he have to like tweet out or something saying, "Please stop sharing this crash." Like, it's like they clearly haven't learned. It wasn't that long ago. It's 3 years ago, and like you say, it was the same corner. I don't know what you think, but I think maybe some changes need to be made to Arrabbiata too, because clearly it's a problem with that particular corner if it's happening again. Obviously, high siding in the pack, that can happen at any corner, and it's not necessarily, there's not much you can do about it, but maybe that curb should be totally flat, no edge to that curb at all, and then just a bit of green on the outside. Just give people a track limits warning, whatever. But like, I know it's even worse now because they have the Misano curb there, which again also is kind of like literally someone went over the edge of that curb and died a couple of years ago. So you're going to make the drop steeper. Seems a bit silly to me, but yeah, I think it should be a flush curb completely, really, or because it's happened. Like, clearly, it's easy, especially on a Moto3 bike, to run over that curb and high side. I don't know what you think, but yeah, it was horrific to see. And it sounds like he's relatively okay, but again, you never know these things. They did tweet out he's got a couple of fractures as he is. I think he's got away relatively unscathed, but even still, it literally was like watching 2021 again.
Broken right scapula and humerus. So humerus is the upper thigh bone. Scapula is, I'm not too familiar where exactly that is, but he's obviously, I'd imagine he was collected and hit on the right side, which is where he had the collision. So they're more than likely going to be caused by Farioli's bike. But yeah, I'm not too sure about changing the track as much more. I'd rather see them. I still would like to see them increase the capacity of engine Motor 3 to make it a bit more in the rider's hands, because I feel like with Motor 3, I feel like they're so on the limit. Not really so on the limit, but they're taking so much liberty with these bikes that these incidents happen. Um, I suppose you can go back as far as '06 Stoner, how you sided out on a GP bike, so it's probably not all down to the bike. It is a bit of a it's there's no perfect answer, especially for this corner, because you could argue the bikes are at fault. You could argue the new curbs, which I think we were both pretty vocal when we kind of got a first look at these, that these are going to cause issues. We saw it in Qatar. Bartelli crashed on it. I think was Yamanaka another rider who crashed on it. Am I right in saying? And I think he crashed in the race.
So one of them hit the wall, didn't he, on the inside?
I think that was Bartelli. He like kind of went off, came back across the curb, and then crashed as he came back across the curb, and that went into the wall. And again, as soon as we saw them, it goes, look great if they work. Which, in fairness, take out them two crashes in Qatar, which were voice of concern at the time. They did really work, especially in the penultimate corner. People ran wide, had to pick the bike up because they couldn't like use the track limits at all, and they do work for that sense. But there's always the fear of what if someone will say, like, you saw how aggressive the snap for Alonso was when he dropped off a curb further back. It was pretty much the exact same in the incident today in the Arbiata too. So it's a horrible thing to see again, and it's always Motor 3. They're so close, and again at Mugello, the slipstream plays such a part. And I think if we could maybe in the future, we've kind of gotten the rule changes that we needed in GP. I think Motor 3 needs to be had a look at now, because I think bigger capacity bikes just gives a bit more torque, gives a bit more in the rider's hands. We'll see bigger groups, and I think that helps across every track. Whether our Beata 2 needs to be slightly changed, that'll be something we'll probably see in the future. I don't think that will happen, to be brutally honest. Some of the top level in terms of the organisation can be very stubborn in making changes. It takes a lot for things to be changed. So, for example, these curbs, it took a lot for them to come in. It will take a lot for them to go away as well if we keep seeing these issues. So, yeah, it's an unfortunate one again to see, unfortunately, today. After the red flag, though, we got another sprint race from Motor 3, which was all exciting at Mugello. Holgado got a penalty for his turn 1 incident. Rhys, I felt harsh for double long lap penalty. What did you think?
Yeah, I think he shouldn't have got a penalty. I don't even think he's at fault, to be honest. He's ahead going into the corner. He's overcooked a little bit. He's picked the bike up. Rueda just tips in anyway and hits him. And then they wipe out, who was on the outside, was it Nepa? I think.
Nepa, yep.
Like, if someone in front of you is running wide and missing the apex, you pick the bike up. You don't just keep turning in. Like, I get that obviously Holgado was kind of behind him as they went into the corner, but if someone's like overcooked it and is running wide, okay, yeah, I suppose they're running wide towards you, but it wasn't like he just careened into the side of him. He had a bit of a moment with the rear brake and sort of had to pick up a bit. I don't think he should have got a penalty for that, honestly. I think it's a bit very harsh. And it's actually interesting that the two of them actually ended up on track together as well in the end, Rueda and Holgado. Like probably, if you're talking about it in that aspect, I don't think he deserved a penalty, but I've never seen a penalty like even things up so much that the crash basically cost the same amount of time as the penalty because they ended up together. But yeah, it seemed a bit... I don't know. The penalties have been better this year. I mean, I think that's kind of been clear because we haven't been complaining about it as much. But the last few rounds, they started to make some weird calls again. And I think we'll talk about it in MotoGP. There was a lot of sort of outrage about certain things. And to be honest, I don't think they actually did too bad with those calls. But yeah, it seemed like a weird one. Everyone kind of said racing incident, and then he got a double long lap for it as well, which I guess that's the penalty for knocking somebody off. But I've seen worse incidents not get penalised. So yeah, I mean, it means, like, again, I mentioned it earlier, the crash with Quartararo and Oliveira in the sprint race. That's probably worse for me, but no penalty for that. So yeah, this just seems a bit pointless of a penalty, to be honest.
I agree as well, because again, we will touch on the Fabio and Miguel, even though we've already kind of touched on it twice in Moto3, so probably won't have much to say about it when we get to GP. But um, for me, Holgado comes in a bit hot. He has a bit of a kind of a wag of a tail on entry, and I believe it was Munoz in front of him, and he's kind of just slightly avoided him. But at the same time, it's not. He hasn't gone in there out of control and punted the two riders off. He's just kind of emerged in line with them. So it's very harsh. And again, to go back to the Miguel Oliveira, he didn't get a penalty for something that I believe to be heavily a penalty if you've seen the footage of it. But yeah, you are right in saying that recently we have seen some questionable decisions where you're thinking, like, it seems like they have good kind of purple patches, the stewards, where we feel perfect. That was a racing incident. We don't need to penalise anyone. That was good. But then it just seems that sometimes it drops the ball. The whole podcast will be probably talking about penalties, because later we'll have to discuss Pecco's clown penalty, as he called it. Yeah. Obviously in Le Mans we had Bastianini basically just refusing to take any penalty because he disagreed with his first one.
That's Catalonia.
Catalonia. My apologies. Correct.
Actually, didn't Joe Roberts cause a Turn 1 pile-up in Catalonia and not get penalised as well?
Yeah, he did.
Yeah,
and that was probably worse than what we saw today from.
Worse, yeah.
So it's just it's the inconsistencies. Yeah. You need a rule book. You need to stick to it. We have guidelines and they don't stick to them. So unfortunately, it's tough, because who's to say next race in Assen we won't see Moto3 rider do exactly what we saw today, not get a penalty. We see Moto2 rider at the back of the field do the same in Moto2, not get a penalty. And then Alex Marquez does it on Frankie Morbidelli and he gets a double long lap. Then there's serious questions to be asked. It has to be consistent. I can understand decisions. If they keep them kind of consistent, we can kind of work with these decisions. But it's the fact that they're not being consistent in them is the biggest issue for me. So unfortunately, once again, we're kind of questioning stewards, and yeah, that ruined his race in the end. I don't think Holgado, regardless, was having a good. We'll kind of again touch on him again a bit later when I get on to Alonso next. But Holgado wasn't having an amazing weekend, but that kind of put any chance of a good result out of it. Someone who had a great result, another great result. We already kind of brushed on him in the first start, was Alonso. It seemed like the red flag kind of in a way benefited him because he just restarted and just was able to got to the front of the group again, was able to hold a really good pace, and then the last couple of laps he was perfect really, and it just shows he has something over everyone in the class, which is not something you see very often. A lot of time in Moto3 you'll see riders that have great race brains where they know where to be on the last few laps to get a move. He just seems to be able to take himself out of the race by putting in these laps.
Yeah, it's more of a Jean Mir kind of way to win, isn't it? Or
yeah, exactly.
Martin.
Danny Kent at some point as well in his season.
Did it a few times as well. So we have seen it in the past, but yeah, like you said, the last couple of years it's more been like Guevara didn't really have a lot more pace than Garcia, for example, but he probably put himself in better places in the race. And last year, well, Masia again definitely didn't have more pace because he was definitely on a worse bike, but he put himself in. He had some races where he was obviously pretty fast, but he obviously played his position quite well, and he had some help in Qatar as well, I think. But yeah, so it's not typically what you see. Like, you are right. It's we see it the occasion, the odd time. I guess Brad Binder, you could say as well, kind of had a bit more on everybody. But again, I think a lot of that was aggression that he had in races as well. So, which obviously David Alonso has in spades. But yeah, to actually, there's like several weekends now. I mean, Austin, he did check out. Jerez, he should have checked out. Like, he has consistently had more pace than the rest of the pack, and on tracks where he's been able to get away, he's managed to stay ahead.
Yeah, and it's becoming a worry because he already has a big points gap at the top of the championship again. Holgado wasn't really on form today. The next man I'm going to go on to is seriously impressing me is Colin Vire, and again he was the man today. In the last 3 laps, I think he put in 2 fastest laps, kind of back to back. And if we weren't sitting here talking about how amazing and how good of a job Alonso was doing, I think we'd be absolutely blown away how Vire is putting in these, because it's second season. I know you kind of make a step from one season to another, when you've been to every track, you have an idea of how the race weekend plays out. You have a bit of a setup. He's same team and stuff like that. But you need to remember that he's also kind of a rookie and then another new year on different tires. So he's also probably, in my eyes, slightly behind in terms of data, because he hasn't been to all these tracks 3, 4, 5 times. So what a job he's doing, and just so close to the win today. And again, I think back to the Jerez podcast where Alonso crashed out, and we were like, yeah, out of everyone I personally was saying, out of everyone kind of left in that race, I feel like Weir had enough. But I'm thinking back, he probably was doing the classic win at the slowest pace possible, because he was just staying ahead of Munoz that day, and I think he was just managing that race perfectly. I look back and actually think, maybe I got that slightly wrong, that maybe that he wasn't on his limit everywhere. He was actually just holding back because he knew the rider around me at the moment, it isn't, for example, an Alonso or Holgado, who someone's going to be able to push the pace on. So his race management seems really well. And again, I think with 3 or 4 laps to go, he dropped to 6th and then managed to put it right back in. And again, if it wasn't for just the outright speed of Alonso, Weir definitely could have had a chance of winning it today.
Yeah, I think he could have done. He really did have some fantastic pace. And to be honest, even with Alonso, I think he perhaps could have took it to him, because, like you say, he had the fastest laps of the race. Really, his race was lost in the lap where he got shuffled to the back of the pack. He obviously he led coming out the last corner, didn't he? I think he even led over the line, but he then got beat up. Alonso obviously then took the lead, and I think he decided at that point that he needed to go, because he probably realised that Weir was quite fast. And then obviously he then got kind of pushed back to the back of the pack. Alonso pulled out the gap then, and it was pretty much the same gap then until the end. He actually made some inroads back on him, but he was pretty close on the last lap. He only needed a couple more bike lengths to be in the slipstream, but I think as a bigger rider, he would have struggled to draft past Alonso, because Alonso's not exactly a big guy. He's very small. So yeah, he was probably at a bit of a disadvantage on the straights, but was making up for it. Interesting, we've kind of seen that last couple of years. Dennis Onshie did something pretty similar last year. He was pretty faster at the circuit, even though he was obviously down on that straight line speed and that slipstream effect. But yeah, again, I mean, we were talking about how good Colin was doing last weekend. I mean, he was clearly had something in hand on the brakes on everybody at Catalunya, and again was running really, really good. So yeah, it's good to see, because obviously last year he had some really good races. He obviously won a race last year. He was up there fighting quite a bit. He had a couple of pole positions, I think. And it was a surprise last year, because he was good in like Red Bull rookies and stuff, but he wasn't. I don't think he was like a David Alonso or a Rueda or one of these that was winning so regularly and winning championships and stuff. But he was there or thereabouts, and he's sort of taken that form and made a step, and he seems able to match them in the World Championship a bit more. And yeah, I think like if he keeps up this form, he will be the threat behind rather than Holgado, because like you say, Holgado seems to be a bit hit and miss, whereas Colin seems to be pretty much there week in, week out these days.
Yeah, exactly the point I want to get across, that I actually think now that Alonso's biggest threat is Weir, because I think Holgado last year, we started thinking, right, he's really quick, he has kind of everything to win this championship. We were kind of saying, yeah, he's doing well, he just needs to keep going. We got to Aston, had the mistake, and then just looked like a different rider for the second part of the season. Started the season well, and it's already looking like that. It's just a bridge, kind of a step too far already from, because he's already seeming to be making these mistakes far too early. And I know we saw one mistake already from Alonso throwing away what would have been maybe not a guaranteed 25 points, because I did mention how quick Weir was on that weekend, but you still think worst case scenario is podium, so you're thinking 16, 20 points he's taken away. So he would already have over 2 race wins on the whole field if he didn't make that mistake. And you just start to think he can nearly just start bringing it home, third, fourth, second, week in, week out. Now, he doesn't even need to be winning these races, but he has such an advantage everywhere we go. It's you're starting to think, right, can he have this championship wrapped up before we go to the flyovers? Is it going to be that much of a route? And obviously, for a long season to go, and we can see today as well. We could be talking today now how Weir's after making a big step forward, and he's after winning the race after Alonso crashing out after making a mistake in the Arabiatas. So anything in racing can happen, but for now, it looks like Alonso is well on his way to a title. But I have to say, really impressed with Weir. It just, you made the point that he didn't come into class going, this guy has it all, he's going to be a future GP, Moto2, Moto3 champion, whatever. He came in, he's probably one of the new big things out of the Netherlands, and big stature. He probably won't be able to make it as well as we expect in Moto2 and MotoGP if he makes it because of his bigger size, but he seems to have it all at the moment in Moto3, and I'm really, really impressed, and I'm happy because last year, I felt he got beat up a few times. We remember back to when he was taken out in India, and we were like, it was just like, just slightly, he's missing something, but this year he just seems to have it all, and I think he's a very, very strong race brain, so all that put together, he can have a very strong season. Whether he has enough for the outright speed of Alonso, I'm not too sure, but it's definitely a bit of fresh air seeing someone from maybe not Spain or Italy kind of dominating in the lower classes. See another nationality right at the front is a real interesting one. Now, to finish up, we've already kind of brushed on it, but I just want to say, is Holgado, is his season already kind of falling apart? Is he done for this title run in? Or I know we're only at round 7 of 67, but do we feel like he's maybe already shot himself in the foot this much? Is he going to be able to take that many points back off of Wire, off of Alonso through the remaining 17 races or whatever it may be?
I mean, I know I was saying that Vire's going to probably be the threat for the rest of the season, or overall will become that, but if you look at the points, obviously Holgado is still sat second at the moment. He is starting to fall a decent way behind, but he's not miles back, because I think Alonso only just took the lead of the championship last round, so he's still going to be within a race wins worth, so it's not that far. And he could very well obviously come back and win the next race and get some points back, because Alonso is really fast, but he definitely has a mistake in him at this point. And I think he could very well still crash out of another race. And you never know. It's Moto3 at the end of the day. You can get knocked off in like pretty much any race, like through no fault of your own. Even if you're leading the race, you could get taken out by somebody else. I mean, Munoz is up there pretty regularly. That's pretty high chance that he'll have contact with you at some point. So, and also with Alonso, he'll be a target because there'll be tracks where he turns up and he's so much faster, and everyone thinks, right, we need to sit this guy up and stop him getting away, and that might cause a slightly over-aggressive pass to go a little bit wrong. So yeah, there's the potential that Holgado obviously could still very well win the championship at this point, but I think this weekend does show that overall he's still not quite the complete package yet. And I mean, to be fair to him, it's only his third year in Moto3, so it's not like he's been around for a long time either. Obviously the other guys that he's battling, obviously Colin and David, that they're both in their second season, so it's not a massive amount of experience more. And what his first season would have been 22, yeah, so 22 was a normal season. I was going to say perhaps it's one of the COVID seasons, but yeah, I guess that was probably a normal season. But I have a feeling, did he break his leg and missed like quite a bit of it? So it's not like he's got a massive amount of more experience than like the rest of the guys he's battling with. So maybe he can still find it, but you don't see David Alonso down in like 18th or whatever. Well, okay, 18th is a bit extreme, but you know what I mean. He's not off the pace really ever, and we see this from Holgado pretty regularly. We haven't really seen it so far this season, although Jerez was a bit of a off one for him, wasn't it? Obviously here was an off one. Remember last year, I think he was a bit off at Silverstone, maybe Austria as well. So he had rounds last year where he was a bit off it, and I'm sure he'll be focusing on those to try and improve them, but he just doesn't have he doesn't have the consistency. I mean, for example, at Jerez, David Alonso crashed at the race. It's a perfect opportunity to pick up 25 points or 20 points and really make a dent, but he wasn't really in a position to do that. So yeah, it's he has kind of shown that the consistency isn't always there, even though in terms of consistency he doesn't make as many mistakes, but his pace isn't as consistent from race to race, it seems. So it might be an uphill task for him to pull this gap back now.
So with Moto 2, we had a shortened race over the red flag in Moto 3. So we had a semi-sprint. It was 11-12 laps of mayhem. And to be honest, I thought this was going to be great because we obviously know all year long we've had a bit of a tire war going on, kind of a race of attrition nearly every race in Moto 2. Everyone's still trying to maybe just find their feet, getting a full race out of a set of Pirellis and getting the best out of them over race distance. So going to this kind of shortened race, I thought maybe we might see a bit more action. And boy, I was right for once. I was very happy to say that we had a very interesting Moto 2 race. Unfortunately, Fermin Aldenguer yesterday in qualifying didn't take any part. Severe neck pain, couldn't ride the bike, couldn't move. His neck was also in a, what do they call it when you have the things around your neck? Brace, that's it. So clearly he was in a bit of issue on Saturday and Saturday evening. So I was surprised to see him race, to be honest. He did say he'd give it a go, and to be honest, he probably shouldn't have. So started low down, was making his way through the pack. I've yet to see a replay of it, but I believe he was taken out by Jeremy Alcoba. Wouldn't be the first time to happen. We saw an onboard. he ends up in the weird part of the track and then just kind of somehow ends up off the bike. So I'm going to say there was something going on there. They crossed the line within a tenth or so of each other, so chances are there were. Yeah, exactly. So exactly. So there must have been something on it. Unfortunately, we haven't heard of any penalty for either. We haven't heard anything more about the incident. We haven't seen a outside shot of it, so we can only speculate. But unfortunately, another no score for our. Basically, at the start of the season, he was the to be crowned champion. It was done and dusted. He was going to win the title. He was going to streak off into the sunset with his Ducati contract and a Moto2 title. Unfortunately, he is now, after scoring another 0 points in 2 consecutive race weekends. Rhys, what's going on for me and Aldegar?
Yeah, the season just isn't playing out how we expected. I mean, the end of last year was so dominant, so unbelievable. It was like, well, clearly this guy's going to walk away. He might have the odd round where the Bosco Scuro doesn't work, or he might struggle with the tyres a little bit. But he'll get there. I mean, round 1, no one was particularly panicking. He had the pace. He didn't have the best race because he didn't look after the tyres. It's like, okay, well, again, that's a learning curve. I mean, look at the podium. Like Barry Baltus was up there. We didn't really expect Garcia to be the threat. Lopez, I guess, was the biggest issue for him because we knew Lopez would probably be quite strong. As it turned out, actually, Garcia was the biggest problem being on the podium that weekend for him. But yeah, it's... after that, obviously, there was the jump start. So there was always situations sort of putting him back, and it was kind of like once he gets there, he'll finally, like, once he got to Jerez and he finally won the race, it was like, okay, this is where it builds from now. But every weekend, something seems to happen to him. It's very strange. I mean, it just almost as if like it's some sort of curse that he shouldn't win the championship now, because I mean he's quite far behind. He I don't know exactly how far, but he's pretty far back now. It's going to be a tough challenge for him. We don't really know what's happened to his neck, but because I think he took part in the free practice in the morning on Saturday. He didn't crash or anything in that either. Maybe he had a moment and tweaked his neck. We have had people suffer injuries from just a moment. I think BSB the other week, I think Peter Hickman pulled out of a weekend because he had a almost high side and pulled sort of his wrist a bit. So he kind of pulled out of that. So maybe that could be as simple as that. Just a bit of a twitch, a high side, whatever, that he's managed to save, but he's just tweaked his neck in the process of it. You never know. We don't really know what's happened, but clearly in some discomfort because he had to go to the... It was reported that he went to the hospital. I think he may have just gone to the medical centre, but yeah, even still, it must have been pretty serious for him to bother doing that, because if you just woke up and your neck hurt a bit, you wouldn't go to the hospital for it. You'd just think, oh, I've just slept on it funny or whatever. So clearly they thought there was some sort of concern, so it must have been pretty agonising, and not just the case that he's woke up funny, you wouldn't have thought, but otherwise, why would you go to the hospital? So, yeah, it's... again, obviously then he put him 18th place, because he obviously didn't do Q2. Actually was making some decent progress up to 14th. Like you say, there was some sort of incident with Alcoba. It wouldn't be the first time he's taken somebody out of that corner, would it? I think he did the same thing to Roy Skinner last year, although that was a practice session, I'm pretty sure. So, yeah, that's...
Practice makes perfect.
Yeah, well, there you go, exactly. He just loves to take people out, does Alcoba. But, yeah, it really is the sort of the end of his championship hunt, I'd say, here, because he's just so far behind now. Another no score. Last weekend... That was a real turning of the tide because he crashed out of the lead and not scored. Again, another no score. And Garcia again was in the lead group. I think Lopez and Aldeguer, I think they were tied on points going into this round. I guess Lopez will have pulled away from it a bit more again now. But yeah, I genuinely feel like he's almost ruled himself out now. If he comes back, it will be a really good comeback. It will be very, very good if he can come back and still win the championship from now.
So he's P6, he's behind Manu Gonzalez, Lopez's teammate, Ayagora, Joe Roberts, and Sergio Garcia. Take a wild punt at how many points he's behind in P6.
62?
Oof. 59.
Oh, it's close.
Yeah. His result so far this season was a no score in Qatar. He got a P4 in Portugal. He got a P3 in Texas. 1 in Jerez and P7 in Le Mans, and then no score for the last 2 rounds. It's going to be huge. Like, this will be one of the biggest turnarounds because in Moto2 it's so difficult. Like, people, like, it's easy. I suppose the only good thing you could say is that if in Moto2 you have a kind of a bad weekend, you can be nearly out of the points. We have seen this before where riders just not feeling it, so it's not completely out of the wild that a Garcia has a race where he's P12, P13, and that's his limit, and maybe you can take big points back there. But really, we haven't seen him dominate this year so far. Obviously, last time out, if the race goes slightly different, he wins it. We're talking about how amazing he is. He maybe comes here, doesn't have the neck issue, and it gets a podium, and then he's closing. And we're talking about, this is the guy that Ducati have signed, and this is the reason why he's on his way to GP with a Ducati contract. So it's a strange one, because again, he's young, the hype I suppose around it, but there's been so many mistakes, so many just unforced errors. And again, today I'm going to say it wasn't his fault. You can't really do anything about being injured on a Saturday. He was doing well in the race. He was making positions, making headway. So maybe today he's robbed of a P6, P5, where he makes good points for a weekend where he struggled. But be almost 60 points back. That's a lot of points. Again, a lot of rounds this season, but you're going to have to be absolutely inch perfect for the rest of the season. Hope that your rivals drop the ball once or twice, because it's so easy to make a mistake when they're on the limit. So it's going to be so hard for him to make the season perfect now from here on. It's going to be really difficult for his championship. I'm really surprised how every week something goes wrong for me. It's so weird. I actually cannot remember a rider this unlucky in a season. Again, a lot of the mistakes have been himself, but he's not really someone that makes that many mistakes. Like, if you go back to when he was probably the real kind of prospect in the class, he'd show form, he'd be there, he might get a podium, he might get a pole position, he might win the other race, but he wouldn't be there week in, week out throwing it at the scenery. He was nearly always he would finish races, he'd get the results when they were there. It was just that maybe on the Bosco score he'd go missing in years gone by on the Dunlops. But it's just a really strange one, because we've talked every race this year up till maybe Mugello that the Bosco scores looked like the best bike. The Calyx looked better this weekend. Yeah, again, we have a race winner on the Calyx, so again, that kind of sways a bit more. Joe's probably been doing bits all year, whereas maybe the others have been slightly off it. But it just, for me, felt like it was a bit of a swing back towards Calyx this weekend. I'll kind of throw back to you in a second, see what you think of it. But for me, I just don't know where he's going to be able to make up all these points on people that look so consistent. I'm not going to say X, Y, and Z look consistent. I don't want to put the blinkers on already for Aston on certain people, but he looks like the weak link in this title hunt, which is quite strange. But did you see the Calyx were just a bit more there this weekend, or am I kind of again making things up as I go?
I feel like the Calyx was there more this weekend. I mean, it's not been miles off every other weekend, but it seems like the Bosco Scura has been better. But I do wonder whether the fact that it was a sprint race kind of played into it a bit more.
Maybe.
Like, I feel like the Bosco Scura has always been pretty good on its tyres compared to the Calyx, and I just wonder whether... I mean, they probably have made a step. They seemed a bit more... There seemed more of them up there. But, I mean, even still, there were still 3 Bosco Scuras in the league group. So, yeah, Joe Roberts won, but who finished second behind him now, actually? It was Lopez, right? Finished second.
Manu Gonzalez.
Okay. Oh, yeah, it was Gonzalez. Yeah, it was Gonzalez, wasn't it? Yeah, because Lopez ended up tripping up with the empty helmet speed-ups, didn't he, and Bosco Scuras, and those two got away. That's what happened. Yep, I remember now. So yeah, 1-2 for Calyx. It's the first time that's got to be the first time it's happened this season. So unless it happened in Portimao as well, I'm not too sure, because obviously I know Canet won there. But anyway, yeah, it did seem like the Calyx was closer. I think maybe they got helped by the fact the tyres weren't a problem, because they also seemed to maybe a little bit stronger at... Well, I was going to say they seemed stronger at Le Mans, but obviously Garcia pulled miles ahead. But other than him, I think Jarowitz was up there, and there perhaps was a couple others up there that maybe made some mistakes. But yeah, I mean, it was always going to be a matter of time that Calyx caught up, because they've just got so many bikes on the grid with the data. But it's good to see that both bikes are competitive. It's good to see, again, that Bosco Scura is doing so well, because, you know, in the past it's kind of been Calyx dominated. And I hope a couple more teams go towards the other chassis for next year, just to have it a bit more of a balanced championship, to be honest. And because obviously, if you keep with the number of bikes that they are, the Calyx will end up just getting back ahead, because it'll have more data. So, a bit like Ducati and MotoGP, it's a massive advantage to have all that data and share it and stuff. So, yeah, I think the Calyx had made a step. Let's hope that they can stay maybe at this level, because they seem to be quite balanced at this circuit. Hopefully, there isn't one dominating ahead of the other, because, you know, it's not the case that I just don't want Calyx to win. I just don't want any one manufacturer to be massively dominant over the other. I'd like them to be relatively close if possible.
So in Portugal, we had a 1-2-3 for Calyx. It was, of course, Canet who got the win. In second was Joe Roberts, and third, Manu Gonzalez. So that is their best result for the season, bar Portimao. So they have shown promise, but that was another kind of a weird race, I felt, where just the whole race...
Lopez crashed, didn't he? The Aldeguer didn't start.
Exactly.
So those two out, and the empty helmets guys, I
so
think, were still finding their feet at that point. So
So yeah, overall that was just a bit of a weird one at the point, but still just to note that there was different results for him. Someone who just seems to still maybe hasn't got his head around the Pirellis is Lopez. He just seems like maybe it's his riding style. Maybe I can't really say it's a bike because we've seen what the bike can do in other hands. Even in today's sprint race, I just felt like he just used too much tyre too quickly. There was some onboards from, I want to say Iagora in the last sectors, and just it looked like that bike was protesting on every corner inch. Again, he's a very aggressive character on and off the bike, so that definitely will play a part in it. But it just looked like in the last 2-3 laps of this real shortened race where we expected tyre wear not to be as much of an issue, it just looked like he dropped it, because last 2 laps the front shoe just bolted away, and he kind of, his aggression kind of kept him there in third, in fairness. And again, that's probably part of why he's so good, but at the same time he is turning into a bit of a tyre killer. What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, he's always killed the tyres, hasn't he? I mean, even if you remember back to the first season where they drafted him in from Le Mans to replace Finale, I think you remember him, he led at Aston for a while and then dropped back because he ruined the tyre. I think he do it at Silverstone as well. He did it in a few places where he led the race for a while and then dropped back. I think he finally put it all together in Misano and ended up winning there. But yeah, it does seem to be his riding style, because if you're killing a Dunlop tyre, you're definitely going to kill a Pirelli. And it seems every weekend he runs out of tyre. So yeah, I mean, you can see just the way he rides. He's so aggressive into the corner. He's probably picking the bike up, spinning it on the exit, or using more of the tyre to get out the corner. I mean, some of the dive bombs he was doing in the race and stuff. I mean, there's that one lap where he absolutely sent it into turn 1. I mean, that must have done some pretty bad damage to the tyres. So you can see how quickly it can happen. I mean, the tyres are very fragile. Pirellis are known for being that way. So yeah, I think that's what it is. I think it's just his riding style. He's going to have to try and learn how to stop doing it, because there's over 2 different tyre suppliers. Okay, yes, I guess the constant is the chassis, but the chassis clearly has always been quite good on his tyres in comparison to the Kalex, and the other riders don't particularly have a massive problem with it. Iagora has the opposite problem. In fact, he actually is really good on the worn tyres, but maybe not as good on the new ones. So yeah, I think it's definitely probably Alonso's probably the weakest area, is the other than maybe sometimes the intelligence to not go for a pass because there's not a gap. But in terms of the actual outright ability, I think that's probably his weaker area, is actually saving the tyre, or knowing when to save the tyre, maybe.
He seems to kind of get away at the start of the race and just seems to be using so much tyre, because we've seen so many races this year, and again, he crashed in Portugal. I'd probably put my money on the same thing would have happened in Portugal, where he probably would bolt and then get caught and probably end up finishing 5th or 6th, being 4 seconds off what he was doing 6-7 laps ago at the start of the race. So he's an interesting character. Still just clearly hasn't got his head around until he does that, really. And he's not, especially now with the Pirellis. You maybe could argue the case that in Moto 2 with the Dunlops, you can build that gap early and then deal with the issues you've made yourself. But for now, he's going to have a real struggle kind of getting the Pirellis to a whole race distance. And again, he's another one where you'd imagine he'd be right there for the championship, and he's just been misfiring again because he's having these issues week in, week out. But someone today who was absolutely on his best form that I've seen, and I'm really, really happy because we talked a lot last year about him, that is Manu Gonzalez. And someone last year, we said if he just got a slightly better package, better team around him, we could see what we saw today, and that was him pushing Joe Roberts all the way to the finish line for the race. Really, he was really impressive again today. And again, we've already talked this year that maybe the Kalex isn't there, so maybe if we've stuck him on a Bosco, what could we see from Gonzalez? He's been really impressive. I'm a big fan of him. He did crash out, I believe, last week. So again, has a mistake in him at times, but he's probably not the rider that you'd consider crashing as much as Canet will say or something. He doesn't make that many mistakes, but it just shows when the grip level maybe is there, maybe just a slight issue. We know Mugello is a bit more of a conventional track in terms of just the overall grip the track has. So it shows that when he has on the overall speed is there, he can be very, very competitive. And today, inches away from his first victory.
Yeah, he was so close, bless him, right to the end. I mean, he actually took the lead briefly into turn 1, so it really showed you that he was in the battle for the end, like with Joe Roberts, but just couldn't find a way past him around the rest of the lap. He rode really, really well. He's been riding pretty well since he got into the class. His rookie season was pretty decent. Last year, like you said, we made a lot of mention of him. He was there or thereabouts. In fact, he had a bit of the Lopez in him. He started off the races well and would fade back for the tyres, but we always had question marks over the VR46 Mastercamp team, which, there's no disrespect to anybody in that team, of course, but it's a relatively new team. I believe it's basically the Petronas team, pretty much the old Moto2 Petronas team, and there was always question marks over that team in terms of sometimes they'd be good, sometimes they wouldn't, and obviously a lot of the people probably moved on now. It's been a few years, so probably it's quite a different team. But if you look at them, they're not really doing a lot. They're getting the odd good result. I guess Alcoba brings home a decent result. Like he was actually quite good in Catalunya. I think he finished fourth. Suzuki's barely finished a lap on the bike, so I suppose that's not really. He's having a really torrid season, bless him. I mean, he's either been taken out or crashing in every single race, so it's just not really gone Ayumu's way. So maybe that does reflect not necessarily on the team, but more on the riders. But Gonzalez's teammate last year was Nazani last year, wasn't it? I mean, he was not ever really on the pace. Kenneth Kuba the year before wasn't really on the pace either. So it's hard to tell, but if everybody that goes into the team isn't doing that great, it probably kind of says the team isn't amazing more than that one guy is just like, or every teammate he gets is really bad. So it kind of shows that Gonzalez was the difference. He was being quite good within the team that's struggling. So we always said as soon as he got onto a better team, he would do better. And the Grassini team's always been a pretty strong team. Did struggle a little bit the last couple of years in Moto2, but does seem to have made a step this year. Arenas has been going pretty well in some races, although this weekend he was notably pretty absent. So yeah, it's exactly what we expected to see from Manu. As soon as he got onto a bit of a better competitive package, he'd be up there fighting week in, week out, and he pretty much has been. He's been in that sort of top 5 every weekend pretty much, and I'm sure that first one will come before you know it. It's one of those things that's just got to play out for you. And Joe Roberts, he's always been really good at Mugello, was really good today, just in both his pace and aggression, so it was always going to be a tough battle to beat him.
Yeah, again, I think it's safe to say we're both fans of Manu here in the podcast, so it'll be a nice day when he finally gets that monkey off his back. But again, he's not been around that long. You mentioned again last year, it was just maybe we just felt like the Petronas team of old that turned into the Master Camp was just, it was never one of the A teams, probably a C team at best. So it just felt like that when teams that could see what we could see, that there was a rider there that just needed to be kind of nurtured into a way of getting him into a full package where he's kind of growing into that now in the class. On another day he wins here at Mugello, and that's no mean feat by any means. So the fact that he was that close to Roberts, who's having his best season, bar none, he has always gone well at Mugello regardless of what tyre or bike he's been on or what team he's been in. So very positive steps again for Manu, again bouncing back after the spill in Catalonia. So it's great to see. And again, maybe he goes into the kind of little mini break we have now over the next couple of weeks, comes back, we might see a bit of stardust from him in Assen. But I have to end the Moto2 section on Joe Robert loves a good short race. First win came in Portugal when we had that kind of weird, was it the dry tyres, wet rain at one point of the tracks?
It all rained, didn't it? Like turn 3.
Yeah, they all crashed, and basically he wasn't doing very well that day. He didn't get caught in that red flag because he was so far back, and then he won a battle with him and Dixon. So his race win has always been a bit of an asterisk.
Lost to Dixon, I think, on that.
Yeah, that's exactly, yeah. The one rider ever to lose to himself. But a lot of people in the paddock have always felt that Joe Roberts' win was a bit of an asterisk, because if that race doesn't rain and plays out, he probably scores like 2 or 3 points. I do believe he was down in like the mid-teens during that race, so it was always a bit. But today there was no question. Again, I know a shortened race, but he still went head to head with everyone in the field. It was a real proper elbows out race, and the overtake on Manu when he managed to fight back after being overtaken into one, that was a real show of aggression and skill. And we saw him get moved aside by Lopez into turn 1, really ran out onto the marbles, and he still managed to come back. So it just showed that really Joe had so much in hand today, and he just felt he was so good, got pole position. What a race weekend for him. And again, I think there's been questions that apparently he's been in chats with the owner of Trackhouse, that they've been seeing together in and out of the motorhome stuff. So I think that's almost pretty much sewn up that he's up to GP next year. Gets a race win here, a second in the class, first proper one in my eyes. Yeah, what a rider, what a talent. It's great seeing another American coming through, and he's a great character off the bike. He's someone I like listening to his interviews and stuff. So, in fairness, I'm really happy to see Joe doing the stuff in the class.
Yeah, I mean, it really was. Like you say, he obviously won that race at Portimao, but there wasn't really anybody left in it, so it's always been a bit of an asterisk. I mean, at the end of the day, you had to stay on, but it was kind of ridiculous that half the field crashed and they didn't allow any of them to restart, so that was pretty much, like you say, he was running around miles off the pace in that race, and I don't think he was maybe quite that far down, because I think he did He obviously saw everybody go down, had time to react, but I don't think he was like P20 or anything like that. But yeah, he was obviously he got the victory that day. And there's been a couple of times since where maybe he should have won. Obviously, Catalonia a couple of years ago is probably the big one that he sort of lost out on. It was weird that he really struggled last weekend, considering Catalonia in the past has been a stronghold for him. But even still, turned up at Mugello, a track he's always been strong at. Pole position, like you say. We've seen that before, though. We've seen him be on pole position previously a couple of times, and he's faded in the race, he gets beat up or whatever. But on this occasion, no, he showed the aggression. He showed that he belonged to be there. He shows that he's fighting for this championship. And yeah, like you say, he gave Lopez a bit back. He obviously gave Gonzalez a bit back on that last lap. He got shuffled back in the pack a little bit because Lopez ran them both wide, didn't he, a little bit at one point, and he managed to get his way back to the front again. So it just showed he had a little bit of everything today, and it definitely is the best race I've ever seen him do, which I guess makes sense because it's his first proper win, really. But, in terms of the aggression, I mean, he showed in Le Mans, to be fair, that he wasn't scared of going toe-to-toe with Lopez. So he kind of showed that again, and yeah, it really was a good ride. And like you say, I think he is looking more and more by the day suitable for that MotoGP seat. And again, not to go back to the same incident we've discussed a couple of times already, but when one of the people in that team is taking out somebody else and not performing that great, it's it kind of opens up the seat for him potentially for next year.
It's funny how much that incident has been touched on. It'd be great to get
an out of point sprint crash has been mentioned so many times
in all three classes. Yeah, exactly. We'll get to Valencia at the end of the year, and it all comes back to Miguel Oliveira and Fabio Quartararo Mugello. That's where it all stems back. That this incident has gone all the way back as far as that. But the point you made there, Joe, is correct. It's just he's shown glimpses before with the Dunlops, but he's never been this good. He's never been this consistent. And to be honest, he had the opportunity to move with Aprilia about three or 4 years ago now at this point. I think wasn't he the one to replace Redding? Am I right in saying that? But just at the time,
it was to replace Iannone, was it?
Yes, you are correct. My apologies. So he would have been alongside
They kind of had
Aleix.
to fill the gap with like Savadori, didn't they, for that season? But then it was kind of like, okay, well, who are we going to actually sign?
Yeah, exactly. So in fairness, your memory as always outlives mine. But he turned it around the time, and to be honest, the GP kind of carousel kind of comes once, and if you don't really get on it, you're really, really hard pressed to get on it again. We've seen, for example, Johnny Ray. It came once or twice for him, and he just waited for better offers, and he's now going to retire as someone who'd done a couple of wild cards, and that was it, or fill-in ride, you could say, back in 2011 on the Honda. He did Aragon Mazzano, I think.
When it was 2012, wasn't it?
Was it 2012? Sorry, I knew it was one of them. I was trying to think. When he was battling Rossi at Aragon, I was trying to think which livery Rossi had on. That's how I was trying to pinpoint it, but I couldn't remember because I believe he was ahead of him even back then. But yeah, it was just that was his only opportunity in GP. And again, it's quite easy to see Joe Roberts not getting that opportunity because he turned it down at that point. But again, it shows that he has the smarts, and he turned it on at the time that wouldn't have been good. We saw Sam make the move into Aprilia. It was never right for him, and unfortunately, that was
now, isn't it?
Very different Aprilia now. But if Joe moved back then, I would have said it was probably a similar move where he might have been up, chewed out, and back out, and then they would have got whoever they wanted next year, similar to the way they had Sam. Obviously, that Aprilia was 2 years late.
He wasn't as good as he is now either, so I think he would have struggled.
Exactly,
yeah.
He would have done exactly what Sam would, though. He would have been respectable, but needed time, and Aprilia probably wouldn't have given it to him at the time. Now he's going into a really good Aprilia, and in fairness to him, it'll be a joy to see in GP. It'll be brilliant to see Texas when we have a GP rider from America on the grid. And yeah, just overall, he's had a stunning season. Whether he gets the championship or not, I'm not too sure. There's a couple of riders. Probably Moto2 is probably the biggest question mark over the championship. Who could win it? For me, Oyagora, Garcia. For me, you can't ride him out no matter how far off he is. Gonzalez maybe is a dark horse if he can get that win and kind of go on a run. And of course, then as well, you do have Joe Roberts. So there's a lot of riders that can have a play in the championship. And to be honest, if Joe gets top 1 or 2 in the championship, if he can win it, fair play to him, goes up as a champion. If he gets a top 3 in the championship, that's been a brilliant year for him all around. But I think it is pretty much all set from now to move up with Trackhouse. So even the racing hadn't even started, and we had our first big talking point from Mugello for the GP class. Pecco Bagnaia got a clown's penalty in his own words, not my words, of course. Rhys, at the first watch of it, I thought it was a bit harsh. I thought Alex Marquez does he grabs a bit of rear brake, gets the bike to slide in past him, makes it look a bit worse than it was. Then he tries to kind of ride alongside him and give him rounds. Pecco just annoys him. Pecco like leans into him with his head and then rides past him. Very funny looking. I then saw from an onboard with Pecco, and the speed difference was shocking for me. Straight away then I knew Pecco 100% was getting a penalty. And he gets a grid penalty for the main race. Didn't come into effect for the sprint, which means he didn't have any kind of issue. If he qualified on pole, he would have been on pole for the sprint and then would have got his penalty for the main race. Ended up qualifying second, so was on the front row for the main race and front row for the sprint, second row for the main race. But I'm going to throw it to you now. We've talked a lot. Next up point is Fabio and Miguel, so try not to mention that in this one. How did you think the stewards did with this penalty?
Yeah, they were pretty much bang on, to be fair, this time. He was dawdling on the racing line, right in the middle of it. Alex Marquez has to dive out the way of him. Doesn't really matter if the guy has to dive out the way, to be honest, because the offence is dawdling on the racing line, whether the guy actually manages to avoid you well or not. That was the thing. He was right in the middle of the line. I mean, he made himself look like a clown, if anything, by complaining about it and making the comments he did. I mean, like, this is the thing. You need to just sometimes accept when you made a mistake and that you're in the middle of the racing line. It's clear as day. Whether you think Alex Marquez was unnecessarily trying to avoid you, or whether you think that him throwing up his hands is a bit immature at the end or whatever, but you're in the middle of the racing line. You rolled off because you were heading back to the pits. That's the offence. You're not allowed to do that when there's somebody behind you. There was somebody behind you, and you got a penalty. So yeah, I think fully deserved. Not really a lot else to say. We've seen. It's not something Pecco does every weekend, don't get me wrong, so I'm not going to be too harsh on him, but it's more the way he acted about it afterwards. So sometimes you just got to take a bit of responsibility for your actions and just say, all right, I made a mistake, guys, which is something that he does seem to struggle with quite a bit, because it always seems to be an excuse when something goes wrong for him. But it just takes me back again to the whole, well, I fell off because the bike was too good. Like, I don't know. He does say some weird things in the media sometimes. I don't know whether maybe... Is it a language barrier thing sometimes, or I don't know, maybe he's just surrounded by a lot of yes men that just tell him that he's absolutely in the right. And I suppose there is the whole feud between, I guess, the two camps there anyway. So yeah, maybe if it was a different rider, he'd have been a bit more accepting of it. But yeah, anyway, he got the penalty. Didn't really affect him in the end anyway. So Stewards went the right call for once, to be fair, and it was a bit silly to kind of make such a fuss of it in the media and people making such a fuss of it on Twitter and stuff, when clearly it was a clear penalty and it was never in doubt for me.
Yeah, and the fact he got like the whole team to challenge the penalty was a bit of a stranger for me, because we have seen before that, like, the fact that you can go after a penalty can get the penalty increased. This time it didn't happen, but it was just needless. Again, it's just... Sometimes I feel this isn't just to pick up. Sometimes the top riders can feel they have, on the bike especially, this bit of arrogance that, well, I'm the champion, I'm the top rider in this class, I'm the guy, and they just have a bit of lack of respect for the racetrack, for their kind of competitors, and they can just kind of sometimes do some questionable things with just like not use your brain on track, as in thinking Mugello was one of the most flowing fast circuits in the world. There's no slow corners at Mugello. You're in that corner. Was it coming into Carntire? It was. So you're coming into a blind corner in a way, like, so. It's a big risk to basically on the race line there, and it's a penalty, a bit of a soft penalty really, because to be honest, well, not a soft penalty, but it obviously didn't affect him. But I thought there'd be a long lap or something. I didn't think a grid penalty, because a grid penalty, he was always going to qualify in my eyes the front row. I was surprised he didn't take pole. He obviously tried a bit of a strategy to go out late and then pit early to get the second tyre on for qualifying. Just made a mistake on his second lap, just in between 2 and 3, just the front kind of bobble, and that was his session done, and he was second. So it could have easily been a first and a fourth for him today in terms of qualifying, but it didn't make a huge difference. He was still going to be there. I think maybe, yes. Again, I'm not. This is what I mean now. This is where we can argue whether it was the right penalty, but it was definitely a penalty. But I think we need to have these consistent penalties where we can say, well, they've got it right here, but they've penalised the same guy the same way. As I feel like in Moto 3, if someone does this, it's immediately a long lap. So I think
it's based on your number of offences. I think it's a grid penalty at first, maybe, and then also I think it's maybe a grid penalty when you do it in practice, but a long lap if you do it in qualifying. Because I guess ultimately practice isn't as consequential for holding somebody up. I know it's a safety thing at the end of the day, but also you could just do it to deliberately hold somebody up, which is obviously a sporting thing. So I feel like maybe that's what it is. But yeah, I hadn't really thought of it till you said, but a lot of the time it is a long lap for that. But I think it does depend. I think you get maybe a grid drop first and then maybe a long lap. And I know it definitely goes from 1 to 2 if you keep doing it. So yeah, not too sure. I guess Morbidelli will be having a back of the grid next time he does it. But surprised it was actually somebody else for once, I guess.
Yeah, it was a stone on penalty, and we're going to move on now to the next one, which was a penalty by this one. Next one we're going to get to. We haven't talked about it in this podcast. You might not have even heard about it. Fabio versus Miguel. We didn't see much of this at the time. Something I saw actually afterwards, and it's Miguel going for a move, makes a mistake, loses the front, and collects Fabio. Fabio goes through the washing machine, and his comments of being up in the stewards were pretty scathing afterwards as well. Yeah, you're personally pretty big fan of both riders. You like Miguel as well as you like Fabio, so you're two. It'd be the equivalent of Bezzecchi and Morbidelli crashing into each other for me, I suppose. What did you make of the incident, the lack of penalty, and just overall, how big of an incident was it that we had to bring it up 6 times so far in this podcast?
Yeah, I mean, we've kind of been joking about it because it just came up, but it just kind of naturally came up one of the times. I mean, yeah, maybe it was a little bit forced one of the times, just almost for the humour of it. But it's not much of an incident, to be fair. Oliveira goes for moving to Scarpa, which is a tricky corner to pull a pass down at, and he comes from quite far back, kind of just aims for the curb, just loses the front, just completely wipes out Fabio. There wasn't space. It was, yeah, a bit of an optimistic move. One of those moves where it's like, I'm being held up by this Yamaha here, I need to pass him quickly, and I think that's part of the problem, because obviously the Aprilia doesn't have massive straight line speed either, really, compared to like the Ducatis and stuff, so they don't have such an advantage over the Yamaha on the straights. They also don't really have a massive advantage on them on the turns either, because the Aprilia is just like a better Yamaha, really, these days. So yeah, I think that's ultimately where it comes from, bit of desperation, but silly move. Should have been a penalty. Not sure how it's not a penalty, because you go for a move from that far back, it was never going to work. You then, I guess, yeah, okay, he got penalised himself because he also crashed, but that's not how it's been done before. So, yeah, it definitely should have been looked at. I don't know what Fabio actually said about the stewards. I know he said some stuff about them, but I haven't actually seen exactly what he said. But I know he wasn't very happy, and rightfully so, because he did get completely taken out. At least, I guess it's kind of like, at least it wasn't out of a better position, but, for Fabio's sake, because the Yamaha looked really good coming into this weekend. Actually, may as well just talk about the Yamaha now a little bit. They were looking really good at the start of the weekend because they tested here previously. Rins got straight through to Q2. It's actually second in practice, which I cannot remember the last time I saw a Yamaha that high up in the actual timed practice that matters. Fabio couldn't get through, unfortunately, though, so he had to start further back. Rins qualified 10th. They both ended up pretty much in their normal position by the end of the race and in the sprint, so yeah, it didn't really actually end up panning out for them that weekend. And I guess this kind of almost sums that up, that the weekend started with so much promise for Yamaha. They looked like they could be really good, and they were in the gravel out of not a very good position in the sprint pretty early on.
Yeah, I'll start with the Yamaha, I suppose. The big thing for me, it was they had data coming into there, so they were already on Friday. They were probably where they are a bit sooner where they're normally at, so that's probably why they maybe were slightly up the time sheets, because Rins obviously P2, that was the hold your breath lap. That was a brilliant lap from, in fairness. Fabio was 11, so Fabio just misses out, but again, by the time the Ducati, the Aprilia, the KTM overnight kind of do their thing, they were still not much different to what a normal race weekend would have been on the sprint and on Sunday. For me, completely agree with the actual incident, what you said. Penalty definitely for Miguel. It's desperate, it's a lunge, it's half-hearted. The comments I saw from Fabio were some snippets where he basically says that like race control are similar to children, where like they're kind of like, well, we don't know what you want us to do, kind of similar situation. He says he feels like the people that he's dealing with when he got called up have never seen racing, they don't know what they're looking at, they're inexperienced. He said they need more proficient people in that department, because he just says that it just is like a bit of a joke that they're calling him up and he's kind of like explaining to them what's going on. They're kind of looking at him as if he's two heads. So it's just again, it's something what we've heard with Zark. We've now heard maybe it's a French thing, maybe it's a nationality thing, but yeah, it was strange again because that for me is a straight penalty. That's unquestionably at least a long lap.
It's clear cut, isn't it? It's not much up for debate whose fault that is.
Yeah, exactly. Like Fabio is
crash and someone's clearly at fault,
out.
then it's a penalty. That's kind of how it's supposed to work. But
yeah, I don't understand why that wasn't given a penalty because, and like regardless if you get taken out, whether if Miguel kind of sits the bike up and just kind of T-bones him in and carries on, does he get a double long lap penalty then? Is it that he crashed out too? We just don't know. We're speculating really of why he didn't get a penalty, and that's part of the issue that we've kind of already gone over in the podcast. Is just we're left in the dark with this, Stuart. We don't really know overall why there wasn't penalty given for that. There was a penalty given that. Why was the extent of that penalty different to this penalty when the incident seemed the same? We're just kind of left in the dark a small bit when it comes to this, which is unfortunate. But we're going to move on now, and we probably won't mention this again. We'll try and mention it again. We'll try and bring it back up. You know we will. But is Pecco's sprint curse over? Fabio Miguel, is Pecco's sprint over? Is his sprints after improving, or is it just Mugello?
I think it's just because Oliveira took out. No. No, to be honest, right, I did not know it had been so long since he last won a sprint. I knew he wasn't that great in them, but I didn't realise it hadn't been since Austria last year. And remember that podcast where we were literally... I do. We spent like a good 5 minutes gushing just over how good of a weekend that was of him. Pole position, just had so much pace. He kept Brad Binder's arms the whole time, just pulled away. It was one of the most dominant weekends I've seen for a long, long time. And we thought the championship was completely over at that point, and I guess it was the next round.
It was the next round. So I remember exactly that, thinking oh my god, we killed Pecco's championship.
Yeah, literally, it all went downhill. He got run over and after the high side, and then was injured, and it allowed Martin to catch back up. Martin gained the confidence. Pecco lost it and stuff. But I didn't know he hadn't won a single one since then. I thought at least he would have picked up a win in one of them. But I guess he's had a couple of podiums in it, maybe, but not a win. So yeah, it was a surprise to see. I guess he should have won last week and crashed out. He should have won at Portimao and obviously made the mistake. So yeah, I suppose there has been a couple of sprints that he's thrown away potentially. So maybe that's why. But
did he throw away the Qatar sprint last year? Did he make a mistake in that one?
No, Martin won that from the flag, didn't he? Lights the flag. It was the main race he threw away because he almost hit Digi at the back.
Yes, sorry. Yes. I was.
Yeah. Well, I don't know if he threw it away because I think Digi would have beaten him anyway, but he definitely
made that big mistake.
Made sure, yeah. He almost threw his championship away if he was a couple of inches further forward. That would have been an interesting one. But yeah, to me, it was much of a surprise. So I didn't realise he'd been struggling so much with the sprints. So yeah, the last two sprints, he's looked like the best guy. So maybe he has finally kind of got them sorted. But at the same time, maybe I think Martin's just been a little bit off it the last couple of weekends. I think it's quite suited him, maybe the two tracks that we've had. And I know there's the whole thing that Pecco struggles at Catalunya, but I don't think it's really much of anything. It's the fact that he hasn't made it through Catalunya very often. That's why. I mean, he was good in the sprint there last year. Year before, he got took out at turn 1 by Nakagami. Year after, obviously last year, he high-sided at turn 2. So it's not like he's slow at Catalunya. Because pretty sure he was on pole, wasn't he? So yeah. It was just the fact he couldn't make it around the first sector of the race. So once he did that, he was well away. So yeah, I think in terms of his riding style, definitely these kind of tracks, these two tracks definitely suit him. He's really good at Assen as well, generally. So we'll have to see. But we also know that Marquez is very good at Assen, and he might be able to make the difference there. We know that Vinales is pretty good at Assen as well, and Aprilia seems to be working. Aleix is good at Assen. Don't know about Martin actually, but Martin seems to perform at most circuits now, even if it's a little bit off it. So yeah, but I think Bagnaia has clearly made a step into sprints. Definitely the last couple of rounds, I think he's just had more pace in general, because obviously you remember back to Austin, for example, he just wasn't there for either race really. So yeah, he's definitely made a step with the setting, I think, post Jerez probably. Le Mans, again, the sprint was a weird situation. So I think he probably would have picked up a sprint win more recently, but he's had weird scenarios. Jerez, another one. You could very well see him winning at Jerez with all the people crashing on the wet patches. It's the kind of race he stays in. He crashes out of the races where there's no track contamination, but he stays on when actually it's slippery. So yeah, to keep rambling about this point, yes, I think he has kind of made a step in the sprints now.
Yeah, it was a bit of a shock as well to me, but the fact that we just sat there and thought of it, just go back. If we just remember the run in of last year was Friday. Pecco doesn't look amazing, and Martin looks absolutely amazing. We get to Saturday, Pecco struggles. Sometimes has to go through Q1, gets the best out of the sprint. We're thinking, oh my god, Martin's going to absolutely destroy him in the main race, and then Pecco just finds it, and that played out so many rounds of last year where it was like it's a seesawing of Friday was Martin, Saturday was Martin, and then Sunday Pecco would undo all the work Martin did, and somehow come out with, after extending his championship lead by 4 points, even though he was nowhere on Friday, had to go through Q1 on Saturday morning, was fifth in the sprint, and then absolutely trumps him in the main race and kind of undoes all his work. So I suppose when you actually think about it, it's not actually that much of a surprise, but it's a bigger surprise for me this year that he's been so poor in them, because I don't think maybe 2 or 3 Portugal he wasn't amazing, you could say, as well in Texas, but I think he's been quicker this year in pretty much all sprints. I just think he's had pretty much bad luck, and he's maybe made the odd bad decision here and there. So we'll see in Aston, because it's just, I don't know if one result can kind of turn around. I think, to be honest, you would be pretty spirited to be Pecco around there in any kind of distance of race. Really, he was pretty special this weekend, and going forward, like, we could easily see him crash out next week or next round when we get to Aston if there's a bit of weather. Small mistake, and it could happen again. So we'll have to see with Pecco. You just need kind of a lot of data to kind of see where the trend is going. But for now, he's ended his barren run of poor results in it. But you still don't know if, when Martin kind of has the few weeks off, will he come back? Will he be back to smashing everyone on a Saturday and maybe not being the guy on Sunday? Because he's been better this year on the Sundays, but for me, it's been a bit questionable. Sometimes his Saturday doesn't look as strong, as well as this weekend where he makes a pretty big error. We have kind of gone back and forth thinking, do they need to be pushing this much, make a mistake? Could he have taken the points? He was being caught by Mr. Acosta, I believe, in a sprint, and he was pretty much on the back wheel of him when he crashed, maybe 2 or 3 bike lengths back. But did Martin need to make this mistake? Would have been, was it a bigger mistake than it looks? Is kind of the point I'm trying to get to, really.
I mean, yeah, I guess it's kind of, it's not that many points when you look at it, because the sprint race doesn't obviously give out as many, so it's not as bad. But it's actually, the excuse is very similar to what Bagnaia said last week. He broke earlier there than he did the previous lap because he'd ran wide the lap before, actually, and he tried to carry he basically braked earlier and then lost the front. Bagnaia said like the same thing at turn 5. He just said that I wanted to be careful there, so I braked a bit earlier and fell off. So, don't know. It seems like the Ducati, maybe when you do try and back off, is a bit tricky, potentially. I was a bit dubious of that, but now the same claim's been made twice, 2 weeks in a row by 2 different riders. Maybe it's just, I guess, the go-to rider excuse, or maybe it was some sort of reference to it. I don't know, but I don't think he'd think that far ahead in terms of that. When he just crashed out the race, he'd be pretty disappointed. So maybe the GP24 does have a little bit of that in it, where if you try and back off, the front does get pushed by the rear. I mean, there is more grip from the rear this year with the Michelin tyres, so potentially that is a slight issue. I know Martin was having many front-end problems this weekend. He was complaining about it quite a lot, but yeah, it was a costly mistake, because whilst, yes, the points total wasn't that large, and obviously Bagnaia threw more points than that away last weekend, it kind of then set Bagnaia up for a double hit. Well, obviously he was going to probably get the double always, but like, he'd just gained a load of points back on Martin, then he was going to gain some more, and now the lead's quite small compared to what it was a couple of rounds ago, so things do change pretty quick. It kind of, in terms of points, obviously was a decent bit to throw away, but not that much, but it's more the momentum now that he gave to Bagnaia off the back of that. So yeah, I think it was a costly error. He definitely would have done better to stay on, although I suppose it's pretty obvious to say. I don't think he probably was trying to go, I don't think it was the case that he was trying to win a race he couldn't win. It was just an error. But I think I said this last week, or maybe it was previous week, but everybody's so on the limit now, because you have to be. So it's so easy to make a mistake. Like in previous years, you know, Rossi, Lorenzo years, like if Rossi couldn't beat Lorenzo on a weekend, he'd just like slow down and be like, well, I can't beat him, so I'll just finish second because we're like 30 seconds ahead of everybody else anyway, and then finish like 10 seconds behind him. Doesn't matter. You can do that. You can ride around pretty slow, not really risking much. But nowadays, you can't do that. You'd be last if you did that. So like the field is so close. Well, maybe he's still in front of the Hondas, but It's so I think that's it. Like even when you're feeling uncomfortable, you have to keep pushing because otherwise you're not going to get any points anyway. So it's 0 points or risk it and try and gain some more. It's obviously not taking that extra risk, but I think it's just so easy to make a small error if you're not feeling quite right. And yeah, I think overall, maybe in terms of points, not super costly, but I think in terms of momentum, it's now given Bagnaia maybe a big decent amount to throw away.
Again, I think this championship will be decided by small mistakes from the front three, really, because we probably over the last few podcasts there was like, well, there's only one mistake so far for Martin. Pecco's made a few, Mark's made a few, so the championship standings were really showing off that the person who made least mistakes was towards the top. And obviously, Martin's been ridiculously quick all year. He's really improved on his Sunday form, I felt like, as well. And in battle, he seems very, very much like he's made a step. But then again, today yesterday, I should say, he's made another small mistake, and that's just really added to the part of the season where it looked like Pecco had him comfortably beat in both main race and sprint last time. He did it this weekend. That's two consecutive race weekends where he's been quicker or he's been convincingly slower than Pecco, and that's definitely going to play in his mind, and that's not going to be good going into the kind of little three break we have here, especially the way the main race ended as well. We'll cover that later, but I suppose we'll probably move on to the main race now and Pecco's launch. But it was, for me, the main race on Sunday was decided in the first 50 yards, 100 yards. Marquez comes across Pecco. Pecco goes to the outside, and Pecco leads out of turn 3, which is it's incredible. I was particularly watching him because I don't know if he has a special talent for it, but when he's down the grid, Pecco is absolutely amazing off the line. What he did in Jerez when he threw around the outside into Pedrosa, his race in Jerez was won in my eyes when he got to the front so early. Again today, he made up so many positions early. Got around Marquez, got around Martin, Acosta. He made up them positions really, really good. So just makes that launch early and can just somehow risk it all. And like we talk about a guy that makes mistakes when there's very little pressure on, ultimate pressure, full tank of fuel, tires not in the optimum window, goes around the outside on the dirty part of the track where you could easily be skittled if someone makes a mistake on the inside. And yeah, leads it on the first lap, lights the flag. Peck was pretty good today, I must say, in fairness. He dictated the race as always, but again, for me, it's his race start that has won him the race today.
I mean, to be honest, it's been fantastic all weekend. The only really thing you put against him is the fact that he picked up a silly penalty in practice and just kind of goes with him like all the time. He just seems to make things more difficult for himself than they need to be. But yeah, that start was amazing, really. I mean, it wasn't even necessarily the launch off the line. It was a decent launch. He was sort of level with that Marquez, but he wasn't starting miles back. He was only 5th, so he was always going to be off the line relatively near the leaders. It was just that decisive move around the outside through turn 1. He had to cut up the inside of Vinales, I think, then on the exit, kind of. Or like through the corner. I think the fact that he managed to do that made a big difference. If he hadn't managed to do that, he may well have been mired back in the pack, and it's a different story. But yeah, I couldn't believe it when he went into the lead, because I was watching him on the outside like you were. I saw that he got up into about 3rd. I was like, okay, he's going to pass Bastianini into this left-hander, and then he's going to go straight after Martin. And then it cuts to the next shot, and he's up the inside the pair of them. I'm like, hang about, how's he done the 2 of them into there? Then I watched the replay later, and I saw that he'd already sort of passed Bastianini just on the acceleration zone, so he only really had to outbrake Martin. I thought he'd outbrake 2 riders initially, and I thought, how the hell has he done that? But even still, I think what helps him is the fact that his braking is so strong that he can just go around the outside of everybody into the first corner because he can just brake later than them. So if he goes to the outside, it's a risky play because it can easily go wrong. But I think in MotoGP generally there's not so many first corner pile-ups particularly, so you can probably risk that a bit more than you could in Moto3. It's probably less likely to result in you going down. But even still, it was a fantastic start, and I fully agree he won it then because he proved the day before, he proved all weekend he had better pace than everybody else. So as soon as he got to the front, nothing he could do. The only chance really that anyone had was put him under pressure and hope he makes a mistake, which we have seen him do before, or just send it straight back on him, and neither really worked today. He couldn't send it straight back on him. The pressure kind of worked because the gap got down too low at one point. It got to like 0.2, and you don't do that when you're controlling. You don't let it get that low. So there was a point where Martin did almost come back at him, but then I think Martin sort of maybe ran out of tyre, or I think he did say something like he felt like he was taking too much risk, so I think he decided to back off. But he tried. He definitely tried to put Pecco under pressure, but Pecco, once again didn't falter. And we have seen him crash out the lead here before. Remember back in 21 when he was leading the race, he crashed on the outside of Arrabbiata 1, I think it was. I think he touched the curb, so it's easily done. You have to make a small mistake. We've seen how easy it is to make a mistake here. If you make a mistake, it carries on for many corners. But yeah, really, you can't fault him. His performance in the sprint race, his performance in the main race was fantastic. Also worth noting, the race was 25 seconds faster, I think, than last year, which is a ridiculous margin. It's like over a second lap faster, so it really does show how much the tyres have made a step this year. And it kind of shows when you see how far ahead of the previous year's equipment they are, aside from obviously one of those bikes. But the rest of them, the guys that were really competitive on last year's equipment last year, on the 22 bikes last year, they were really competitive. Clearly the bikes this year have made an extra step, and so have the riders as well. I think the way they're riding is so good. But yeah, that's just wanted to chuck that in there as well. It wasn't like he was cruising out front. He was absolutely going for it, lap record every lap.
I've down here in my notes 225 miles an hour chest. When Pecco got to the lead, it was always going to be this race that was going to control from the front, and it was a question whether Marquez could pass the two in front of him and get onto the back and make something happen. Would Bastianini have his typical tyre advantage in the last 5 and 6 laps? Would Jorge Martin be able to get rid of the demons of yesterday and go and make something happen? It was pretty much like that until about 6 laps to go, but I personally was actually enjoying the 4 of them nearly equal lap times every lap. Probably for a lot of people felt maybe a bit boring. It was a bit of a tedious race because there was lap after lap, not many overtakes. But I just enjoyed seeing every lap, the lap times being between the 4 of them, sharing 1/10 between the 4. And then it was like gaps here, and then Pecker's responded, and then it closes, and you just knew once we got to kind of 5 laps, 6 laps roughly, someone was going to pull the screw, and that was the grain was gone. They were all going to start going for it, and it wasn't by any means a crazy race. But when we did get to the last few laps, it looked like we were on board for a few laps with Marquez. It just looked like he was not going to be able to get past the GP24 of Bastianini every time out of the last corner. They kind of went from 4th to 5th gear. That couple seconds there, just maybe a bike length into Marquez Bastianini put each time, and that's just the difference into turn 1. Santanato, that he could not get it done. And I think we're on board with Bastianini, and we cut to a helicopter shot on the lap that Marquez did pass him, and I just thought, there's no way he's getting a stop. He's no way he's getting a stop, and it's like he's not getting a stop. They both ran wide, and Marquez just absolutely perfectly levels him and just basically runs him to the edge of the track cleanly, but just an aggressive overtake. Make sure that he has no way of cutting back, because he did try. I think on lap maybe 4, he tries a real rash, real aggressive kind of lunge, and in fairness, Bastianini saw it coming, sat up, let him through, and just kind of cuts back underneath him and keeps position. But Rhys, once Pecco gets the lead, was there any other race we're going to get other than just one of these kind of trading fastest laps, managing tyres until the race kind of gets to the final quarter?
No, I mean, to be honest, I'm actually surprised the rest kept with him. I didn't think they were going to. I thought he was just going to check out and that'd be it. But obviously it was one of those races where, he stretched the pack immediately to make sure that there was as few people behind him and there was as big a gap as possible, and just to try and force the others into a mistake and try and break them, of course. So, yeah, I mean, it was a pretty dull race overall. I mean, I get what you're saying. Like, I agree that I do find it interesting to watch the gaps go up and down, but not a lot happened, really. So it wasn't a classic by any means. It's not one that you're going to go and rewatch, is it? But it was when you know the ending, the tense, the amount of the actual intensity is kind of gone for the gaps, because you know how it ends. But yeah, I suppose the most interesting part of the race is watching that scrap between Marc Marquez and Air Bastianini, and it's just so clear how much the 24 had over the 23. We saw it. I remember Qatar last year watching Digi versus Bagnaia, how much every lap out the last corner that Bagnaia was gaining on Digi and pulling away from him when Digi couldn't pass him for quite a few laps. And it was a similar thing here, probably even more so. So it does show that even though the bikes look pretty similar, the Ducatis every year compared to the previous one, they do make a big step. They do make a big difference. And yeah, I would go as far as say if Marquez was on a 24 bike today, he wins the race pretty, not convincingly, but I'm pretty sure of that, because of how much he was losing that every lap there. It was like 2 or 3 tenths every lap probably. So you give him that, he probably wins the race. So yeah, it was interesting to see him. He obviously, like you say, he finally sent it. It was pretty late, but it was typical Marquez aggression. Sort of just got to the point where he could level him and run him wide. Bastianini couldn't do any more. and Marquez got through. And at that point, it was like, let's see, can he catch up to Martin now? But I think at that point, his tyres were just shot. I think he spent so long right behind him and trying to pass him, and it sort of just ruined them. And Bastianini, as we know, is the king of the late race. Obviously, basically got pretty much straight by past him like a couple of laps later and just dropped him. So that was pretty much the most sort of action-packed battle that we saw the whole race. Vinales versus Morbidelli, we watched that for a couple of laps as well, I think. But again, it was just a case of Ducati very fast out of corner onto straight, other guy can't overtake. So yeah, it certainly wasn't a classic by any means.
No, but we did get to the last few laps, and a certain Enea Bastianini shows that for some reason he just does not use tyres. He has a different riding style. The more I watch him, he's sometimes looks very upright on the bike, that he keeps the center line from the head to the shoulders down to his hips is very in line with the tyres. And then I saw him out of Biondetti too each time trying to get his helmet down on the ground, and just the way he threw his body down to pivot the bike up. It's a very impressive riding style, and to be honest, regardless of how well he does for the rest of the season, I think he's going to be shafted. If he gets a factor of Aprilia, I think that'll be a brilliant see for him, because he's a talented rider and he deserves to be there. And again, today he shows his class and why he actually got this factory Ducati seat 2 years ago, and why Ducati picked him at the time over Martin, who now it looks like, I'll probably ask you again at the end of the podcast, the silly season, but it looks like he's probably going to lose his seat to him. Were you surprised to see Enea that strong? Because I was surprised to see him when he got passed by Marquez. There was a lap where the lap he gets past, he basically sits on him, and then through Biondetti one and through the Buccini, Marquez has so much, and I was like, there's just no way he gets back onto him. And we cut to a shot coming into Casanova, he's there again, but he's not close enough to be doing anything. And then it cuts to the lap where it's like, oh, he's actually going to get him, and he passes him. So he clearly had so much. He kind of said in his actual race interview afterwards that he fell asleep a small bit during the middle of the race, because he was kind of managing the gaps, and he kind of got caught off guard by Marquez passing him. So again, it's probably the first time all year that he's really been in the chance of a victory. Obviously, we Le Mans, he was very quick, but there was incidents. In Catalunya, he was quick, but there was incidents. So it's just, he's another rider that doesn't seem to get the clean race weekends that we'd love to see from him. But I was really impressed with it, and that move in the final corner, absolutely unbelievable. I know he had so much more tyre, so it's much easier to do, but be able to do that and have the presence of mind to try it in the last corner, the last lap of the race, and also not to blow the corner and get dragged to the line by Martin. What a move that was.
Yeah, it was a really good race from Bastianini. I think, to be honest, I was surprised that he was able to go with them at the start, because that seems to be his weakness. He's kind of started to qualify a little bit better this year, and he started like the races where he just starts in a decent position, then just gets dropped and passed by quite a few, and then has to come back, and at that point it's too late. But this time he actually managed to get away with the leaders. Obviously he's running third for the basically the entire race. It's interesting that he said that, because I heard him say that as well, that he kind of, once Marquez passed him, he realised, oh, I need to kind of go now, because he wasn't really expecting him to do that. He wouldn't have known how much Marquez was probably gaining on him all the time through certain parts of the track, so he was probably just thinking he's running around and keeping Marquez pretty much at bay everywhere, so he wasn't really worried, but probably didn't realise how much he was gaining in Sector 4, and then was able to finally use that, so he probably was surprised when he finally sent it up the inside of him. But yeah, he managed to get past him within a couple of laps. Like you say, he did actually initially drop back, but I think that's probably when he just had to regroup a little bit. And then after that, I think everybody else was sort of out of tyre, so then he had a big advantage, because it was they're battling a custom time. They were about a second behind Martin at that point, but he pretty much immediately caught that up. It didn't take him long to do that. Got it down to like half a second, and then on the last lap, like you say, to have that presence of mind to go up the inside of him. Yes, he had a lot more tyre, but it's a difficult pass to pull. Obviously, it did require a slight mistake from Martin. Martin was a little wide, or just left a bit too much room. If he blocked it off, I don't think there's anything Bastianini could do, even if maybe he could have tried to drag him to the line, but just feel like it's quite unlikely, because I think the centre grip was there. It was the edge grip that he definitely had the advantage on. But yeah, he rode underneath in there, really good move. Caught Martin off guard, obviously, and ended up completing the 1-2. And like you say, it's kind of showing his pace, showing how good of a rider he is. I don't feel like he's been shafted to lose the seat, because there's been, if you look at last week, for example, he got a long lap penalty battling for like 9th. And he's had weekends like that. That's why he's lost the seat. It's not these weekends that have cost him. These weekends are good, but these weekends aren't every weekend, whereas Martin and Bagnaia are up there every weekend. So I guess that's probably why. But even still, at his home race as well, obviously makes up for the incident of yesterday. where obviously Martin and him had a collision. Interesting one, that one. Obviously, there was a bit of outrage about that not being a penalty from some, but for me, it was I actually, if it was up to me, I probably would give a penalty for it, but because they haven't given a penalty for that kind of incident previously, like Marquez on Bagnaia, which was much more egregious, in my opinion, it's fair to not give a penalty for that, but to make up for the heartbreak of that yesterday, to bring home the second place, I think it's a really good job from Bastianini, and like you say, shows why he deserves a good seat. And I hope he does end up somewhere good. I feel like Pramac or the Factory of Aprilia are probably both good options for him. And I feel like he's perhaps in contention for either or, but I guess we'll see. It also depends where Marquez ends up going. I mean, if Marquez goes somewhere else, he could always return to Gresini. I'm sure they'd love to have him back.
Yeah, it was top class weekend again. Shows why he should be on a factory bike somewhere where it'll be. But it's not going to be factory red, unfortunately, for him. He probably knows that by now. But yeah, it's going to be an interesting run of season because as soon as we get some seat movement at Ducati, everyone will open up. Obviously, we got the news that Pedro Costa will move up to the full factory KTM team this weekend. That was already known. We already knew that was going to happen, but still nice to get it on paper. So now that we can kind of start to see the grid shaping for 25. Someone who is trying his very, very hardest to be on a red GP25 next year is Jorge Martin. Overall, good recovery in the main race for him to recover good points. Obviously, he's lost another couple of points to Pecco, but beat Bastianini and beat Marquez, which is Marquez is the one you'd probably be kind of trying to keep tabs on as well, because I don't think anyone's touching Pecco today. I think if Pecco, you mentioned earlier, if Marquez is on a GP24, he wins it comfortably. I think Pecco has more if he needs it, but again, he seems to manage races. Pecco has no interest in winning races by 10 seconds, even if he could. So I think Pecco always has a bit more if need be. And I think Martin just didn't have enough to kind of really put him under enough pressure. There was a couple of times where Martin came back and showed slight signs that maybe he could get to him. But I think P2 was the max for Martin, and he held his own again, got over the mistake on Saturday and recovered to be a decent weekend.
Yeah, I mean, overall, considering it was a weekend where I was struggling, pole and the podium doesn't look too bad, but obviously in the greater picture, obviously he lost the momentum, really, because, I mean, Bagnaia kind of got it anyway, but also you could look at Catalonia like, well, Martin wasn't quite onto it. He managed to get some points on him in the sprint because Bagnaia crashed, and then kind of didn't let him have it, obviously, in the main race, but didn't risk trying to crash to beat him. He just accepted he couldn't beat him on the day and finished second, so it was still a good weekend for Martin last week. This time, yeah, all right, again, some decent points and still leading the championship, but obviously a big chunk taken out with losing a few points there in the sprint race. But obviously, really, the damage is the main race because he didn't fall asleep, but I don't think he knew how close Bastianini was to him on the last lap and didn't really defend the last corner, and that cost him another 4 points. And I feel like that's a bigger swing because that's 9 points there. That's when you think about that, there's 9 points between first and third place. You only get 12 for winning a sprint anyway, so it's actually almost like the bigger loss was almost finishing third instead of second. I mean, I know it's not in terms of the points, but it could have been a damage limitation weekend where he could have finished third to him in the sprint, lost probably about 5 points, and then finished second to him in the race, another 5, 10 points isn't too bad, but then suddenly it becomes 14, and that's a big increase from 10 to 14. So for one position difference. So yeah, I feel like that's almost where the damage is done more than the sprint. So he did do a good job. He did a good job to try and keep on the back of Pecco, because he obviously got within he got to 2/10 behind him at one point, and that was the penultimate lap, start of the penultimate lap. So he was hanging in there till the end. Like, considering that he'd been struggling, clearly they made some sort of setup improvement for the race, because he definitely looked a lot more comfortable. It does make you wonder whether maybe he could have challenged a bit more if he'd had that setup in the sprint. Maybe refined it for the main race. He perhaps could have been there. He would have obviously been nervous about making another mistake. Whereas if you've just had a decent result and you're in a bit of a cloud nine because you win the championship, you can maybe risk a little bit more, or you just feel like you can do a bit more with the bike. But yeah, I mean, overall, it's not the end of the world. If you're going to crash out of a race, it's the sprint race you want to crash out of. So there is that as well. And he's still got a podium, still leading the championship. Okay, he actually did earmark this round as one where maybe he could get close to Bagnaia, because he felt like it was a better ride than he was this time last year. But Bagnaia seemed to have even another level over him once again today, and he did a good job. He kept pretty close to him. I think really his only mistake at the main race was just falling asleep a bit on the last lap, to be honest, and I think that was more the case that he tried to catch Bagnaia, realised it's a bit too much risk to carry, so just backed off and didn't realise how close Bastianini was to him.
Yeah, it was a good recovery on Sunday, because we saw last year Pecco basically didn't take part in half the sprints and still managed to win the title. We saw last year that winning the sprints didn't always end up being in the being enough to kind of throw off Pecco for the main races. So they throw away the points on Saturday. You're 100% correct. That is, if there's a race you can crash out of, that is the one you pick, because it's half points, half race distance. It's not the crashing on a Sunday, losing all the points, and then having to just think about it for next week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks before you go to another race. That will stick with him. And then next time you get on the bike, you want to right your wrong, you can override. So that can really put you out for a good couple of weeks, can put you out of kilter. So to be P2, to lose it to Bastianini on the last lap, that was a shame for him, because you make a solid point there. That small mistake has cost him big points. And it was, I suppose, what really, if you think of it, Marquez gets passed by Bastianini, and Bastianini just leapfrogs onto the back of him immediately. It was in a way, I suppose, he crosses the line to start the last lap, and there's no immediate threat, so the team don't know it. It's just how fast Bastianini is. And maybe you could say, look, they could probably have maybe foreseen this. They know he's going to be quick. He just dispatched Marquez. He's after putting a good few bike lengths into him. They can warn him straight away to keep your wits about him. He's coming. He mightn't have enough, but just be careful to the last corner. But I think, if anything, into the last corner, he breaks deep, knowing that he's probably going to see a front wheel from Bastianini. If he doesn't, so maybe he breaks deep, goes to the V8, and just the supreme grip of the fracture rider, or Bastianini, just managed to turn and lean him. But Martin just doesn't look himself since Le Mans. He just was off the pace again a slight bit today, and obviously crashed yesterday. Gets fortunate in the sprint in Catalonia, but wasn't happy when he crossed the line there, and the pit box was quite upset with that result. And again, gets beaten in a straight fight with Pecco last time out as well. So it's worrying times. I think the break is coming at the right time for him, and especially for Pecco, because I think Pecco's on a bit of a momentum. If we went to Aston next week, maybe we could see him even take a bigger chunk out of him. So I think if you're in Martin's camp, this is the right time for a break, because things are just starting to maybe get a bit cloudy when things are just not happening as well as he would have liked. So I think for now, he just needs to go away, kind of reset. He's done brilliantly up until pretty much. He's done brilliant all year. He's done really well to get P3 today. A small little change in his race, he gets P2 today. And again, a slight little mistake in the sprint is everybody's going to do that. Just people, they're all probably going to crash again in at least one or two main sprints this year. It's going to happen. They're all so on the limit, so you can't really hold it against them when it's that minor of a mistake. And again, it's so strange to hear riders say, yeah, I was kind of accepting that was the result, and I kind of just backed off, and that's why I crashed. Because that just makes you wonder how good is it the bike, is it the tires, is it the aero, is it just what the aero does to the tires? There's so many questions of, when you back off, you shouldn't be crashing. Then that should not be the way it should happen. So I think he'll look back at the start of his season and kind of think, well, we've done enough. We have a nice lead. We've won races. He's been fast everywhere. Has he been the fastest? No, but you never will be the fastest ever. And I think he's made a step from last year, which is really what he's looking to improve on his last year. Maybe go one better this year. So to finish off the podcast, last time we did note that Aleix Espargaro was retiring at the end of the season, and in shock news, he looks to be signing for Honda as a test rider. Rhys, is this something you thought you'd be seeing after him retiring?
Well, I mean, he said in the press conference, I think, when he retired, that he said he was obviously wanting to be a test rider. And I think he did say not necessarily for Aprilia, so it kind of immediately planted the seed that perhaps he's kind of felt like, well, I've built Aprilia up to a race winner now, let's go somewhere else and try it. So it kind of looked like maybe it was going to be Yamaha or Honda. So it's not a massive surprise. I actually thought it was going to be Yamaha, to be honest. I thought it sounded like maybe that was the place he was going to go. You know, he's good friends with Fabio. He could try and sort of develop that bike. He'd be a good addition to that. It looks like more and more every weekend Yamaha aren't going to get their second team for next season, so it's going to have to probably be a bolstered testing lineup. I think that's what they're kind of going to take that money and do instead, is basically have a even more fully fledged test team. Obviously they've already got Cal and the whole test team, but another rider in that as well, probably some more engineers and stuff like that, like as if you're having a full racing effort. That's probably what they're going to do now. So I thought they were going to sign a Leif for that, but there has been rumours that that he's going to be signing for Honda. I mean, may very well not turn out to be the case, so we'll have to see. But I guess there is that allure for Honda. I suppose there's kind of there for Yamaha as well, but Honda is really the historic brand, isn't it, of MotoGP? Repsol Honda in particular, obviously, has been around for years, especially for the Spanish riders. It's a massive thing, to ride for Repsol Honda at some point. It's kind of like driving for Ferrari in Formula One. Like it's the historic team that's won so many championships over the years, and okay, they're in a bit of a rough patch at the moment, but you kind of feel like they will come back at some point. And Honda, they've won so many races across so many different categories with so many different legends. Like you got Doohan, Rossi, Stoner, Marquez. You go further back, you got Freddie Spencer, the current sort of head of the race direction. So it's for years you go back and Honda's been winning races. Even in the 60s, I'm pretty sure the Hondas are winning. Someone will probably point out that that's not true, but that kind of era, they were still competitive even back then. So it's I can see why he'd want to go there, and also as well, let's not beat around the bush. When you be a test rider, part of the team you want to go for is definitely more money based, because you do a bit of riding, you want to be able to live your sort of lifestyle with your family and stuff and enjoy your retirement. So imagine Honda can probably spend quite a lot compared to some of the manufacturers, so there is probably that element to it as well. I mean, we saw what they were offering Marc Marquez previously. I'm sure some of that money now is free, so you'd be definitely asking for some of that. For Honda, though, could be a good move, because they definitely need a better test rider than Stefan Bradl, in my opinion. Because I've never really rated him as a test rider ever since they really started using him. The bike's only got worse, so kind of, I know it's not correlation, it's not necessarily causation, but since there's never even been another test rider in this period, kind of indicates maybe that could be an issue.
It's an interesting one, because the notes that Marini comes out with most weeks is that it's MotoGP is aero, and until the rules change, it's going to be aero, and we have to focus on aero. But they haven't made any inroads. They're not getting any quicker. Today we saw Mir and Nakagami crash. Marini said his fast stop on the second last lap of the race, which is always, in my eyes, questionable if you can set. Fair enough. You could argue, look at what Marquez and Pecco did in Jerez. They were setting their fast laps on the penultimate lap, but that's for the race win. You're risking everything to win a race. Marini risking everything to be second Honda. It does a bit of a difference there when you think, surely he shouldn't have that much rubber left. You should be using as much of the bike, as much of the potential to be wherever you can be in the race, and being left with nothing at the end of the race. You shouldn't have the potential to set your fast lap. I know the tyres wear and the fuel comes down, and you can get a lap out of it. And obviously with a whole race system under so much rubber, then the track is probably at its best conditions. It is all race weekend, so that can aid to it too. But Honda just are in a mess. Aleix has been known as a good test rider. He's obviously built up a lot at Aprilia. When he was in Suzuki back in the mid-2010s, he was a very good rider and developing. When they came back into class, picking and choosing. When they actually left, he was kind of the glue that held them together. They kind of lost away for a couple of seasons. So if Honda get this over the line, give him plenty of zeros at the end of that contract, it'll be very interesting to see how, like, when you get a test rider, we're not going to see, if he signs for them at the end of this year, we're not going to see the 2025 Honda be a front runner. It'll take time, so it mightn't be until like 2027 we see some of the kind of turnarounds. We'll probably see increments throughout the season of next year if it happens, and then maybe for 26 we might see a step. But it's so hard to claw back time, because we've seen with Yamaha, we've talked about, they had a good test in Mugello, they have a new aero that they can homologate it, and still, alright, they were better on Friday, they had that, the bikes probably made a step, they're quicker on the straight, but they're still not winning races, they're still finishing P11, P14, that kind of era, so they're still really at the same point. So it's going to take a long time and a lot of data, a lot of hard work, and a lot of steps to get back to where they need to be. But at the moment, it doesn't look like Ducati are letting up. Each year Ducati make a step, and it looked like for maybe over the last 18 months Ducati were maybe getting pegged back, Aprilia were getting close, KTM were showing it, and then again this year it just feels like the Ducati have been like, right, we've kind of not really dropped the ball, but they've gotten too close, we're making a step, and now it looks like the 24 Ducati is ridiculous. You have Mark on the 23 one, and Digia seems to be the only other rider that consistently can do it. Alex Marquez and Bezzecchi seem to kind of go missing on that bike a bit, so Yeah, it's the 24 bike really is the way forward for the Ducati. So they've made that step again away from everyone, including Honda, and the test rider role for Elate at Honda is going to be great for him financially, as you mentioned. But overall, will it give them the results they need? You mentioned you don't really rate Bradle. I do, but for kind of different reasons. It's just what you see him over the race weekend. Crashes a lot in the main races. He doesn't finish the main races. As a test rider, time is on the track is the key. Like, so it's all that data they need. Like, they can kind of sift through that and they can understand what's going on. But you're crashing out on lap 2, lap 3, or not getting a full race distance. It really doesn't show it. So maybe we might see the Honda jump up the field if they do get a late and he can figure it out, because there's no question as a rider he does bring a lot of qualities to the team. So it'll be very interesting to see what will happen. But that is where we will leave it for today's podcast. Mugello, as always, has been beautiful and brilliant. We have 3 weeks off now until we go to the cathedral, and it'll be historic Aston, of course. So we look forward to seeing it. Thank you all for listening. We'll see you in the next one in 3 weeks' time. Bye bye.